Hi, everyone. We'll start in a couple of minutes, let people settle in for a bit. Okay, my watch says it's the top of the hour. Welcome to the Friday Forum for August 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Porter, ICLR's Chief Engineer, and I'll be presenting today. I'm speaking to you today from London, Ontario. This is webinar 221 in a series hosted by ICLR, the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, which is Canada's leading source for disaster resilience knowledge. Each month, we present recently completed research related to ICLR's mission to make Canada more resilient to natural disasters. Last week, Eric Sparrowin and Thomas Ing of Richmond, British Columbia, told us about that city's flood mitigation strategy and its resilience goals. This Friday Forum and the next Friday Forum are unusual. Today, I'm going to offer initial lessons learned from the Jasper Wildfire, and then again on September 13th, I'm going to speak again next month on the cost effectiveness of above code wind design of buildings. And I'm going to show that above code design costs society less to own its buildings in the long run. But today, I'm going to give you those initial impressions from the Jasper, Alberta wildfire. I plan to focus on the effectiveness of the fire-smart fire adaptation strategies. I visited Jasper last week in the company of staff from the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, CIFC, and Natural Resources Canada, among others, to perform some structural assessments of the town's buildings. Our mission was to observe the characteristics of burned, adjacent unburned, and partially burned structures, and to make observations about the effectiveness of fire suppression on preventing fire spread within the community. Now, before I begin, here's our agenda. I'm going to present, our webinar is going to last about 90 minutes. I'm going to present for about half that time. Then I will answer questions for the rest of the time. Please feel free to chat your questions into the Q&A box. I'll try to answer your questions in the order they appear in the Q&A box. If we have a lot of questions, I may only address your first question, then move on to others, then circle back to your additional questions. Our webinar, as always, is recorded, and we will post my slides and a link to the video on Monday or so. So if you have colleagues who couldn't attend or you want the deck, you can let them know, or you can come back on Monday to pick up the PDF of my slides. You'll find the video and the PDF at www.iclr.org/workshops. Okay, so here is the theme today. The evidence from the Jasper, Alberta Wildfire Complex shows that FireSmart works. Now, FireSmart is a set of recommended practices to reduce fire losses in the wildland-urban interface. It's managed by FireSmart Canada and by provincial FireSmart agencies like FireSmart BC. What you are seeing here is that border between the part of the town that burned and some of the houses that and the part of the town that didn't. About 30% of the 1,000 or so buildings in Jasper burned in that fire. So I want to provide, before I get started on the Jasper lessons, I want to provide some context. Sandy Ernie and others a few years ago estimated that about 5 million Canadians live in the wildland-urban interface. That's 1 in 8 Canadians. And if you just consider on reserve First Nations people, it's 1 in 3 live in the wildland-urban interface. This map here shows it's colored where the wildland connects with buildings, where people are living in the wildland urban interface. So it's just a subset of the forested portions of Canada, the portions of Canada that are forested or otherwise face fire from the wildland. And the colors indicate the frequency with which those places can expect to be inside a perimeter. So the red dots are places where there is a wildfire in the wildland urban interface at least every 50 years. That is to say, there's a 2% chance in any given year that a place in one of those red dots is going to have a fire. A yellow dot means roughly 1% chance, and a green dot means roughly 0.5% chance. So we're talking about fairly likely outcomes when you consider that there are a lot of places in the wildland urban interface. So we can expect to see wildfires affecting communities pretty frequently. Another point I want to make is that we know pretty well how to protect homes from wildfire. What you're seeing here is some laboratory tests at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, where they're performing side-by-side tests of buildings that have bad fire-resistant features and buildings that have good fire-resistant features. The building on the left, bad. The building on the right, good. And the main features, and what the IBHS has done is they've built these two buildings side by side, and they've thrown embers at the buildings and the embers ignite the bad building and do not ignite the good building. So the features on the bad building differ from features on the good building, and they're mostly about the roof and the siding and the immediate zone right next to the building. And I'm going to get into details momentarily. The key features of wildfire resistant homes, the features that FireSmart advocates and that other experts advocate, are shown in these two pictures. The one on the left is mostly focused on what we do to the building. The one on the right is mostly focused on what we do to the yard and the landscape around the building, the vegetation around the building. So what we can do to buildings to make them less likely to ignite when they're inside a wildfire perimeter are: on the roof, we use non-combustible roofing and various other features to prevent the roof from igniting. Features like enclosing the eaves, using metal gutters and downspouts, having metal flashing at the edge of the roof, and so on. So we make the roof non-combustible in that way. We make the exterior cladding of the building non-combustible by using non-combustible siding like hardy board, that is fiber cement board, or stucco or stone or other non-combustible materials. And we also try to make sure that the windows are at least double glazed, and the bottom 150 the bottom 15 inches of 15 centimeters of the wall are also non-combustible. And then we try to make sure that there's nothing combustible that is touching the house, like there's no wood fence that touches the house, there's no wood deck, or if the deck is wood, is made of low ignition, low fire spread materials. But ideally, it's non-combustible. That's the picture on the left. Picture on the right shows what we do to the vegetation, how we manage the vegetation around the house. And the key features of that are to have non-combustible, a non-combustible apron within 1.5 meters of the house. That's the gray border there. And then in the space between 1.5 meters and 10 meters, we just manage the vegetation, make sure that there's no highly combustible vegetation in there, make sure that the grass is trimmed, and so on. Those are the key features that I'm going to focus on today. I'm not going to talk much about the extended zone that goes out 10 to 30 meters, because most of the houses, few if any of the houses in Jasper had any control over what was going on in the extended zone. Now, I'm going to tell you lessons from Jasper, but there's really nothing new in those lessons. We have seen over and over again that where we apply those principles, the buildings survive. The image you're seeing right here is from the 2018 Paradise wildfire in California. It is the home of the Hare family. The building that is in the lower part of the screen complied essentially with all the same requirements that FireSmart calls for. This building was governed by the California Building Code, but the California Building Code uses many of the same requirements as FireSmart does. You can see that all the nearby buildings, the buildings that surround that house, have burned down. They were all inside the wildfire perimeter, but the essentially FireSmart house survived, and the rest of the houses did not. This is the Hare family on the left, Dawn Hare and her son Liam, and on the right are Oni and Donna Carroll. Their houses in the background, they had basically the same experience as the Hare family. Their buildings, or their homes, survived, where the neighbors' homes did not. All of the principles that I just told you about from FireSmart, they're mature, they're well codified. Versions of them appear in Canada's National Guide for Wildland-Urban Interface Fires, and in the United States in the International Wildland-Urban Interface Code and the 2022 California Building Code. There's no bleeding edge aspect to these features. They're all well established, well codified. There's plenty of statistical evidence from buildings that did and did not comply with these principles that show that the principles reduce ignition. This complicated chart that you're seeing here is from Cal Fire after the Paradise Fire, and each one of those boxes refers to one of the features of the California Building Code's Wildland-Urban Interface fire requirements, and they're very similar to the FireSmart requirements. Each box shows 4 little, anywhere from 2 to 5 vertical bars, and each one of those bars refers to one choice that you can have to build or maintain a house in the wildland-urban interface. Like the left-hand box that says deck, porch, elevated, it shows that when you have an elevated wood deck, that chance of a house igniting when it's inside the wildfire perimeter is about 2.5 times the average. Whereas if you have a composite deck or no wood deck or masonry or concrete, the odds of ignition are below 1. All these other boxes, they also show basically there's a high risk of ignition if you have a wood roof or if you don't manage the vegetation around your house. So my point is plenty of statistical evidence that shows that these principles work. We've also performed benefit cost analyses of these principles. We found in a study for the National Research Council that the National Wildland Urban Interface Building Code, complying with its requirements can cost under $5 per square foot. That's less than 2% of the construction cost of a house. And in the highest hazard areas, can save over 30 times the cost of construction. And that's for new construction. Now, retrofitting is always less efficient because it's always cheaper to build right the first time than to fix a house that didn't comply. Those costs are higher, $10 to $20 per square foot. But in the highest hazard areas, retrofitting can still save many, many times the cost of complying with the National Wildland-Urban Interface Fire Guide. Okay, with all that preface, let me tell you about the evidence that shows that FireSmart worked in Jasper, Alberta. So once again, the mission of this team that I participated with in our building assessments was to examine buildings at the front lines, at the interface between where buildings burned down and where they didn't, and to do sort of pairwise comparison of the buildings that burned down, the buildings that didn't. What we found was that in general, big picture, the surviving frontline buildings generally had good roofs, good cladding, and good vegetation management in the immediate zone and the intermediate zone. The immediate zone, once again, is that 1.5 meters immediately adjacent to the house, and the intermediate zone is the part of the space around the house from 1.5 meters away to 10 meters away. So, picture on the left is a couple of houses right across the street from a block of buildings that burned down. They all the buildings that survived on the left side of the street, seeing close up on the left-hand picture there, they had these, many or all of these desirable features, and that we believe helped them to survive. So let me take you into, I think I'm going to give you about 3 examples of buildings that survived that were next door to, adjacent to buildings that did not survive. So here is a stucco and stone-clad house on Poplar Street in Jasper. Beautiful house, and it has these desirable features. It has a non-combustible roof. That's the asphalt shingle roof that most homes in Canada have. But it was free, that roof was free of combustible debris. There were no dead leaves, there were no pine needles, etc. up there. There was metal flashing at the roof gutters so that any debris in the gutter couldn't ignite the wood underneath the shingles. There were metal gutters and downspouts so that they couldn't ignite. And the eaves were enclosed. And what I mean by enclosed is you can see in the right-hand, the left-hand picture, these horizontal lines underneath the, sorry, wrong screen. These horizontal lines underneath the projecting roof, those are metal panels that prevent embers from getting up into the beams that support the roof and igniting those beams. They also reduces the chances for hot gases to get up there and ignite the underside of the roof. So that's what enclosed eaves are, and this house had them. So that's about the roof. Let's look at the siding now. The siding on this house was non-combustible. It was made of stucco and stone. And the bottom 15 centimeters at the wall base was also non-combustible. So had there been grass or something next to the deck, it could, next to the wall, it wouldn't ignite that 15 centimeters at the wall base. And also all the glazing had at least 2 panes. So that's the cladding. And then the third piece you'll remember that is key to preventing ignition is that immediate zone, the 1.5 meters immediately adjacent to the house, and that is non-combustible. There is a good separation between the grass and any vegetation away from the house. And you can see that there is a metal gate here that connects, that encloses the yard so that the wood fence doesn't touch the yard. It doesn't touch the house. And in the intermediate zone, that's the space between 1.5 meters and 10 meters away, you're allowed to have vegetation. You just have to maintain it. There's the grass is less than 10 centimeters tall, and there's only deciduous trees in that intermediate zone. They've all been well pruned. Here's another building at that interface between the part of the town that burned down and the part that didn't. This is a stucco-sided garage on Turret Street. So you are seeing, once again, I'm going to go in the same order and point out, once again, non-combustible roof made with, covered with asphalt shingles, Class A asphalt shingles. The roof is free of combustible debris, no leaves, etc. There is metal flashing at the gutters. That's just a little piece of metal that's right underneath the edge of the bottom edge of the asphalt shingles that covers any wood that might be adjacent to the gutters. And then there's metal gutters and downspouts that can't ignite. And once again, the eaves are enclosed. And now in this picture, you can see those enclosed eaves a little bit more clearly. These white things here are those metal panels that prevent embers from getting up and under the underside of the roofing and igniting the beams or the roof sheathing. Moving down the building, this garage had non-combustible siding. In this case, it was stucco with concrete at the bottom. Once again, nice clear 15 centimeters at the wall base. All the windows had double pane glazing. So despite the fact that there was all this combustible stuff right inside the window, and despite the fact that there was damage to the window frame, the double glazing prevented ignition to the material inside the windows. Another little feature of having non-combustible cladding is to make sure that all the vents have mesh covers that are closely spaced so that embers can't get up inside of the wall and cause ignitions. Moving to the 1.5 meters in the immediate zone, this garage had a non-combustible apron all around for the most part. There were deficiencies. There were wood fences that touched that building in two places. You can see the picture on the left shows that one of them ignited. The picture on the right shows that one of them wasn't lit on fire by the wildfire, so it's still intact. But that would be something that you'd want to get rid of and avoid to reduce the chances of ignition. Looking a little bit farther from the house, there were only deciduous trees in that intermediate zone. There was no juniper or cedar, that's highly flammable stuff, and the grass was trimmed to less than 10 centimeters. And then I think this is my third example of a survived house. This is a fiber cement clad house on Miette Avenue. Starting at the top again, non-combustible roof that was mostly free of combustible debris. There was some vegetation up there, some moss and stuff. There was mostly metal flashing at the roof gutters. There were a couple of places where the flashing was missing. This house did have metal gutters and downspouts, but it wasn't perfect. The owners seemed to be in the middle of a renovation, and they had recently put on the fiber cement siding, and in order to put it on, they had to rip off the eaves. We don't know if they were going to come back later on and enclose the eaves, put those enclosures back on. The eaves had been enclosed, and we saw evidence of where those metal panels had been cut off to make room for the renovation, to allow the builders to add on the hardy board, the fiber cement cladding. So here you're seeing a close-up of that fiber cement cladding. It looks just like wood. You can't really tell the difference unless you walk up and knock on it. So, but it's non-combustible, and there's that 15 centimeters at the wall base that is concrete, non-combustible, and the windows down at the bottom, the windows all the way around, were mostly double paned. There was one window that was single paned. looking into the vegetation management. The non-combustible apron was, well, it was mostly non-combustible. There was grass right up to the edge of the building, but it was well trimmed, less than 10 centimeters tall. So not ideal, but in this case, worked out all right. Okay, so those are the three examples of surviving houses that I wanted to emphasize, those big three parts. I emphasized the roofs were non-combustible, the siding was non-combustible, and the vegetation in the immediate zone and the intermediate zone were all well maintained. Now I want to talk about um, some other lessons from Jasper that kind of emphasize how important the immediate, so protecting the immediate zone is. So the picture on the left is evidence of a ground fire that came up from a canyon in the background and burned toward a condo complex. So it burned through the grass on the ground. The buildings in that condo complex, they had combustible material right down to the ground. So having that combustible material, this brown stuff here at the base of this wall is wood, and it essentially touches the ground. It would be relatively easy to ignite if fire came right up to it. And the cladding was also wood, so relatively easy to ignite. And you can see that there's a shrub just adjacent to that wall. Had it ignited, it would have helped to ignite the rest of the building. So we saw over and over again how buildings appeared to have been ignited by fire spread across the ground, and igniting the building via the immediate zone. Now, I'm going to show you a video now of two colleagues from CIFC who work to maintain and promote Fire Smart. They were there on the structural assessment team. And sorry for the background noise. Just as we started recording this video, there were people in the background cutting up some of the fallen firewood. So you'll have to listen carefully to hear the speakers. Last thing, Ray Alt and Magda. Sorry, Magda. What's your last name?
Magda Zahara.
Zahara, associated with Fire Smart. Ray, you were just saying, or you were both just saying that. You think the number one issue at this particular complex was the immediate zone. Could you just sort of give me that bit again? So what's wrong with the immediate zone in these buildings?
So the immediate zone is from basically the structural wall out 1.5 meters. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that there's nothing combustible there, because if there is, and it doesn't matter how big it is, if it catches on fire and it creates a flame, and then it actually involves the structure, the wall of the structure. So if you look behind you, there's just a couple of examples here. So the deck goes right up to the wall. It's T111 wood panel siding. So if that deck catches on fire, for sure it's going to ignite the wall. You've got the fence. It's a wooden fence, and it's connected to the wooden wall. And then, we're looking to come out 1.5 meters. This one's not so bad, but some of them have
they have
landscaping,
yeah.
all sorts of flammable stuff that would be receptive to having an ember fall on it, catch on fire. So a small ember lands in potting soil that's very dry and it's got a lot of organic or peat, and it actually creates enough of a flame that then lights something next to it, which then has the deck on fire, which lights the wall, and then the whole complex is going.
Thanks.
Yeah, and not in this case here, but we often will see some homes landscape with, let's say, bark mulch right around their foundation, or they'll plant junipers or cedar bushes that are very decorative but also highly flammable. And the reason Ray is really focused on that too is because that's where the embers will accumulate the most, right? As there's wind, like when you think about how snow may accumulate right around the foundation or right? That's where the embers will accumulate, and that's where you're closest to the structure, and it's gonna ignite small things that will lead to the ignition of the big things.
And the immediate zone is 1.5 meters?
1.5 meters, and not just from the structure, but any attachment. So in this case, you would want to be out 1.5 meters from this deck, because this deck is attached to the building.
Right.
So you're really going like 1.5 meters. So let's say around here, like this, and then like this.
That should all be non-combustible.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Last thing. All right, so we saw that kind of thing over and over again. Another thing I want to tell you about today is the efficacy of having sprinklers. They helped enormously. I'm going to show you a couple of instances of how sprinklers were used to basically stop fire spread. So this is a this is the north. This is the north edge of the southwestern part of Jasper, where the town abuts a hillside. And what you're seeing in the left-hand picture is a fire hydrant with a hose attached to it. And the hose earlier on was connected to the one that runs up the hillside there. And it's that long hose is run for several hundred meters behind the houses, between the hillside and the houses. And there were sprinklers attached intermittently along the length of hose. So you'll see, let me show you a little bit farther along there. So this is about 100 meters from where we were just standing, where the hose reaches up behind the second or third house down. And I'm looking up the hill. The fire was spreading down the hill toward the houses, and it is stopped where the sprinklers were running. We're spraying water and cooling the vegetation and preventing ignition. So this is a place where, without these sprinklers, that fire would have almost certainly would have reached those houses. Here's the second case where sprinklers were all these great fire smart features, but it also had sprinklers. So the house that you're seeing in the left-hand picture survived. Its next door neighbor burned down. So you walk in the gate that you're seeing in the left-hand picture right behind that car, and you walk around to the back side of that house, and you see that this owner had installed had this 5,000 gallon tank of water and a manifold. Sorry, wrong screen again. There's the 5,000 gallon tank of water, and there's a manifold. This wasn't just put up at the last minute. This had been installed deliberately long before the fire came along. And a manifold simply takes the water from that tank and splits it so that you can attach a bunch of hoses to it. And that's what you're seeing. So there's one hose that comes in from the tank, connects to this manifold, and all these hoses come out to distribute the water to sprinklers all around the house. So here's what those sprinklers look like. Sorry, we're in the right-hand picture. You're seeing a little bit more closely the manifold. You can see that there are hoses that go up onto the roof. There are sprinklers up there. In the left-hand picture, there's one of those hoses, and this little dot here is a sprinkler that sprays that had sprayed water onto that wood deck. There were, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 of these sprinklers sort of ringing the house. There's one of them in the left-hand picture. This little black thing shows how the sprinkler was spraying this portion of the yard. The right-hand picture shows one of those hoses reaching up onto a wood deck, and this little square thing here is the sprinkler that was spraying that had sprayed the wood deck to prevent ignition there. There was stuff in the intermediate zone that 1.5 to 10 meter zone that was combustible. As a matter of fact, the right-hand picture is showing the garage that was attached to this house. It was not protected in that way. It was a wood shop and metal shop. There was lots of combustible fuel. It wasn't protected, and it burned down. But despite the garage burning down, the rest of the house survived. So there's just a couple of points I wanted to make about the efficacy of sprinklers. Last few points I want to make have to do with the necessity to work in cooperation, especially if you have a building a building that has multiple housing units in it. Neighbor cooperation really matters in that case. We're standing at that same apartment complex that Ray and Magda were speaking from a few minutes ago. We're looking at the back of a block of buildings, and remember, Magda said something about how this was a relatively good yard that we were looking at, but other yards had a lot of combustible stuff. The picture on the left is showing you an instance of a lot of combustible stuff. The fire reached right up to all that combustible stuff. Now, it was probably prevented from catching all that stuff on fire by a line of hose that we saw had been laid out there. But had that hose not been there, those planter boxes would have burned up. They would have ignited those fences. The fences would have ignited the houses. So this is a situation where if you've got one housing unit in a block of 6 or 7, and you're the only one who is doing the fire smart stuff, chances are good that you're not going to be able to protect your unit. You have to work in cooperation when you share a building with others. The picture on the right is from the same apartment complex. It is a block of buildings that burned down in that condo complex. Another point I want to make, a related point, is that virtually every block of commercial buildings that burned down had at least one cedar roof. Cedar roofs were a big factor. So I'm going to play you another video of Magda and Ray talking about the cedar roofs. Okay, Magda and Ray, right across the street. What are we looking at there?
So that's a commercial building with cedar shakes.
No, stay in the frame.
And virtually if you look all along the top of Magda, all of those cedar shakes or shingles, they're all burnt. They're just completely consumed. And then it's caused the roof to fail, and that actually there's a number of spots where the roof has fallen in.
Yeah. And you see all the shingles also strewn across the bottom there on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
Yeah, but then the next building starts. It's all metal roof.
Nothing. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And all that debris in the street over there, is that all from all this?
So the black debris is from the cedar shingles. And then if you look further down the street, well, that's actually a building that they had to knock down to try and slow the fire's progression.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay. So as I just said, every burned commercial block had at least one cedar roof, and Ray mentioned the debris in the street. We saw pieces of partially burned cedar roof where the cedar shingles were, I don't know, the size of my phone here, partially burned. So picture these things, and these were embers that were in some cases flying through the air. So that's just another point about how embers can ignite the intermediate zone and the immediate zone. So all the embers from this burning roof could have ignited nearby buildings. So just to recap, fire smart features seem to greatly reduce ignition. I've made sort of 4 points here. Number one, the surviving frontline buildings tended to have non-combustible roofing, non-combustible cladding, and well-protected vegetation, especially in the immediate zone. Point number two, ground fire spread caused a lot of ignitions. So the immediate zone and the bottom 15 centimeters of non-combustible wall mattered a lot. Lesson number 3, there were plenty of damaged frontline buildings that had problematic roofs or combustible cladding or bad protection, bad vegetation management in the immediate zone. And fourth, we saw very few surviving frontline buildings that had bad features. Few surviving frontline buildings had combustible roofs and combustible cladding and poorly maintained immediate zone protection. Okay, so those are the big lessons that I wanted to offer you today. And I want to emphasize that, although I, as a researcher, am always interested in learning more. The FireSmart features, the effectiveness of FireSmart is absolutely certain. So science is never done. Don't let anybody tell you that because engineers and scientists don't know everything, that means that FireSmart is not a good idea. FireSmart effectiveness is certain. We can always learn more. Science is never done, but that does not shed any doubt on the effectiveness of FireSmart. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will take some of your questions. Just 1 second to bring up the Q&A. Okay. Christine Calahoo asked, please provide the web link for the Friday webinars. Sounds like a must attend. So Christine, I'm going to ask you to Google ICLR.org webinars. You'll find the link almost immediately. If you don't find it, just drop me an email and I'll respond. My email is kporter@iclr.org. Yujun Yin asks why the no eaves show a material higher ratio than the other two. Okay, so I think you're speaking about the CAL FIRE odds ratios. I showed you that complicated graph early on in the beginning, and one of the bars. Let me just take you back to that. Explain what I'm talking about, if I can figure it all out. There. Okay, let me bring you back to that complicated chart. There it is. So in that fourth box, no eaves, it shows that the ignition odds ratio is 2. So why would a building with no eaves have a higher chance of ignition? Well, that's a complicated artifact of the math that's going on here. Basically, no eaves is also correlated, my belief that no eaves is correlated with a lot of other bad features. So it's very hard to hold all else equal. There are very few buildings they're all identical, except that this one has eaves and that one doesn't. I think what you're seeing here with no eaves having an ignition odds ratio of 2-to-1 is that buildings without eaves, they tend to be inherently combustible, like they're manufactured homes, with combustible siding. I suspect that that's what's going on there. I've noticed that myself. All right, let me go back to the Q&A. Raisa Musoni says, since we've seen houses in Jasper survive thanks to the FireSmart approach, has there been an increased effort or demand to apply these principles to new buildings or to retrofit existing structures in vulnerable areas? I think the answer is yes. The increased effort is evident in the National Research Council's work to create the National Wildland-Urban Interface Fire Guide, for one thing. I think you see a big uptake in FireSmart principles in communities that have just been hit by fires. So there was a fire near Colorado Springs, Colorado, a few years ago, and immediately that community adopted the equivalent of, or a rough equivalent of FireSmart in the form of a version of the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. So you see a lot of people closing the barn door when their neighbors' horses get out. There's a lot of uptake there. Stuart Clark, if the immediate zone was clear, were there any examples of combustible cladding actually catching fire? I don't know, Stuart. I can't remember examples like that off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Hi, Dan. This is from my colleague Dan Sandig. Um, Dan says, hi, Keith, regarding the home with the sprinkler system, the tank, and the manifold, would the homeowner have activated the sprinklers themselves before evacuating? If not, who would have operated or started the system after the homeowner was evacuated? Was there a gas-powered pump involved? All right, so Dan, I don't know who started the sprinklers. Presumably it was the homeowner. We didn't see any other system like that. Maybe that homeowner had friends in the fire department who started everything up, but that was an extremely elaborate system. That 5,000-gallon tank was also being fed from the municipal water system. So there was a hose coming out of the service line into the tank, so that when we got there, it was full. And then there was a gas-powered generator running the pumps that pushed water into the sprinklers. So yeah, there was a gas-powered pump right next to the manifold. Gemma Fournier asks, what is the cost to have FireSmart come out and assess your property, home, or business? I think it's free. I think that if you call for you, or they'll find firefighters who are trained to it. At least there's a lot of communities where the local fire department will come out and do this for free. They'll walk around your house. I participated in one of these screenings a few weeks ago, where a couple of members of the fire department came out with an iPad, and they were taking pictures of the homeowner's house, just like the pictures that I was just showing you. And they were circling things on pictures to say, get rid of this bush and whatnot. The screening that I attended, the firefighter was there for an hour. And talked with the homeowner beforehand, went and did the screening, came back to the homeowner afterwards, and talked through all of the recommended changes to the homeowner's house. Curtis Ulrich says, thanks, Keith. You are welcome, Curtis. As you've said, many of these lessons have been known for a long time. The challenge that I've faced in my work here in Manitoba, in which I see in other jurisdictions, is the difficulty in implementing FireSmart principles consistently across a community. Rather than a scientific challenge, we face a social challenge. What do you see as promising approaches to implementing FireSmart? I think that the social proof is a big way to get people to implement FireSmart. When you see your neighbors doing it, that tends to normalize doing something. So whatever your neighbors are doing, you find that if your neighbors are putting solar panels up on their roof, you are much more likely to put solar panels up on your roof. If your neighbors have a sign in their front yard saying, I did this great thing to minimize the fire vulnerability of my house, you are more likely to do it. So I think that social proof is a great way to promote FireSmart, to have, and also another good way to get people voluntarily to do FireSmart is to have trusted experts advise them to do so. Firefighters are among the most trusted professionals in Canada. So if we can fund firefighters to go out and advocate for FireSmart within their communities, people tend to trust them and tend to believe what they're telling them. There are also other potential ways that we can promote fire smart voluntarily. I think that incentives help, monetary incentives, having multiple experts all saying you should do fire smart, that helps. I think that there are carrot and stick approaches to fire smart advocacy, like there may come a day when insurance companies refuse to underwrite buildings that they perceive as being too high a fire risk. That is a stick approach, and you might need to do fire smart in order either to get insurance or to get it from the carrier that you've already got, get it from your preferred carrier, or to be able to afford it. So a lot of different approaches, and I think that the best approach is many of the above, to bring together as many of these incentives as possible into a community. So the social proof, the experts, the financial incentives, and so on. Cheryl Evans asks, will the residential sprinkler system that I showed, with the residential sprinkler system that I showed, what was the power source? So this was, Dan asked the same thing, was there a generator? Yeah, there was the generator, but there was, people also had sprinklers, just, hoses just coming off of their, the faucet. So the pressure in the public water supply system kept a lot of water spraying onto lawns. Oops, sorry. Lyle Unwin asks, during our assessment, did we observe any treatments within the adjacent forest where forest management did and did not influence fire behavior? Lyle, I'm sorry, I was focused exclusively on the building assessments. I didn't really pay attention to treatment in the adjacent extended area. So I can't answer your question with any authority. An anonymous attendee asks, any evidence that internal fire protection sprinklers in buildings are beneficial, or is the interior sprinkler infrastructure quickly overwhelmed or destroyed by an aggressive internal fire? Good question. I don't know. We didn't go into any houses. I didn't see any evidence of internal sprinklers or internal sprinklers working or not working. I don't know what I would have seen had there been any. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question. David Carrozza says, thank you for a wonderful presentation. You are welcome for a wonderful presentation. Did you identify any frontline homes that were well protected but still caught fire? No, I don't think I did. We were looking for just that sort of thing, and that would have falsified our hypothesis that Fire Smart worked. We didn't see any. That's not to say that there weren't any there, but we didn't see any. Sandy Johnston asks, I showed a slide where the homeowner had that 5,000 gallon water supply. What's the recommended volume to keep on hand for rural residences? Wow, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. Sorry, that's a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but clearly that 5,000 gallons was great. By the way, Dan, if you know the answer to some of these questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. An anonymous attendee asks, insurers struggle to obtain reliable information as to which properties have followed Fire Smart recommendations and whether it's been maintained. How might this situation be ameliorated, for example, with satellite and drone imagery, video processing by AI, etc.? Well, I can't speak to all the different ways that you might verify that FireSmart is still in place. ICLR is considering a certification program that where you might get a certificate saying the homeowner has done this thing. We observed it within the last 5 years. FireSmart also provides evidence of that communities are involved in a FireSmart effort. Now that FireSmart neighborhood certification basically says the neighbors are doing something. It doesn't tell you that they have been 100% effective. But you know, you could ask, presumably you could ask your insureds for the evidence that the firefighters give them. Those reports that I told you about, where the firefighters running around with an iPad, that gets sent to the homeowner. So the homeowner says, we'll have a PDF saying a firefighter examined my house, and these were his or her observations, and you could presumably see, based on the age of the inspection, whether you believe that the protection was still in place. But that is clearly a real challenge for insurers. Robin Urquhart says there was an example of a multi-pane window that showed fire damage but prevented entry of heat and embers to the interior space. Can you speak to the type of residential windows current on the market in Canada and the vulnerability they might impart to the enclosure? In your opinion, is a tempered pane required for resistance per the National Research Council's WE Fire Guide? Okay, so we did see a lot of damage to double-paned windows where the outer pane fractured, but the inner pane did not. We didn't see any situation where both outer and inner pane fractured. So the way that I interpreted that was that radiant heat from a nearby fire caused the heating of the air between the two panes and expansion of the outer pane of glass. And that sort of a thermal expansion, potentially differential expansion, caused the fracture of the outer pane. Now, the inner pane had, cool air, relatively cool air right behind it. There was this enormous heat sink in the form, created by the space behind the inner pane of glass that kept the inner pane cool. At least that's my hypothesis. And I pitched it to a couple of fire experts, and they said that sounded reasonable to them. So you asked the question, in my opinion, is a tempered pane required for resistance? I think that double panes are definitely required for resistance. I think that we saw a few instances of tempered glass on windows. They're harder to come by. You don't go to Home Depot or Rona and order stock windows with tempered glass on the outside. At least I've tried to find that sort of thing many times unsuccessfully. That's not to say that you can't get tempered glass on windows. You can if you deal with a window supplier. They can get tempered glass on the windows. I suspect that the benefit you get from that is the outer pane isn't going to fracture. So the window is going to survive, and you're not going to have to replace the windows after a fire. Whereas with all those fractured outer panes, there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of cost to repair and replace those broken windows. But of course, at least the rest of the house didn't burn down. So I'd say tempered glass really helps. It probably greatly reduces the repair cost for glazing. It's marginally more expensive than ordinary double pane. It adds about 20% to the price of glazing, at least according to a quick estimate that I made and some other colleagues independently made. And it's not as easy to get, but it is available, it is out there, and it would seem to be beneficial. Kaidas Kafali asks, thank you for the presentation and insights. You are quite welcome. Were there examples of homes that were built to code levels or based on FireSmart principles, but ended up not surviving the event? What would be the main causes in those cases? Maybe the extreme winds. Well, okay, so we didn't see, when a house burns down, there's only part of the evidence is still there. So we did see burned down buildings that had at least some of the FireSmart features. There were a couple of houses that clearly had stucco walls that burned down. But we couldn't tell whether they had the other fire smart features or not. There would be all this debris around the edge of the house. There could have been a lot of combustible material right up against the edge of the house, etc. So my suspicion is that extreme winds mattered a little, but deficiencies in aspects of the exterior cladding or the roofing or the immediate zone were most likely responsible for those ignitions. There were extreme winds. In some cases, there's evidence that winds reached as high as 150 kilometers an hour, and that is very challenging for a building. But what we saw, the evidence, and I only heard about this from a guy who was looking for wind damage, were little bits of buildings that were torn off, peeled back roofing, bits of gutter that had been pulled away. We didn't see any in the few days that I was there. We didn't encounter any evidence that buildings blew down but didn't burn down. So my guess is that the main causes where buildings were only partially fire smarted was the deficiencies. Sean Tracy asks, back to the eaves question, are they referring to eaves or soffit? No soffit would allow an opening for embers to penetrate the roof system, attic or wall covering cavities. No eaves would be a more modern home design, typically resulting in a flat roofs. So the eaves are the portion of the roof that extends beyond the wall line. The soffit is the underside of that portion of the roof that extends beyond the wall line. And enclosed soffits are soffits where a material covers the underside of the roof truss, the 2x4s and 2x6s that hold up the sheathing on the underside of the roof. So enclosing the eaves, enclosing the soffit of the eaves prevents embers from getting up into the framing. We actually saw cases where there were unenclosed soffits, and there were openings along the upper edge of the wall where embers could get in. So plenty of modern buildings had eaves with enclosed soffits. Some of them had eaves with, well, plenty of modern buildings that we saw had eaves with enclosed soffits. I hope that answers your question. Stuart Clark, will the insurance industry be providing any incentives to promote home ignition zone fire smarting? Stuart, great question, and but bear in mind that the insurance industry does not act monolithically. As a matter of fact, it can't act monolithically. It's a question of whether individual insurers will decide to provide incentives for fire smarting. And my guess is that we will see that increasingly. Now, as a speaker, as one of the people who asked a question earlier on pointed out, it's really hard to offer an incentive when you don't know that the thing that you're offering an incentive for has actually been done or is being maintained. So the challenge there is going to be getting some certificate or some evidence that the fire smarting work was done in the first place and is being maintained at least recently enough for the satisfaction of the insurance industry and not industry, for the insurer. And that is going to, how much effort they're willing to put into that and what their rules are going to be is almost certainly going to vary from insurer to insurer. Stuart, I hope that answers your question. Jessica, hi Jessica. This is Jessica Showbridge. She says, free assessment and incentives to do the fire smarting. This helps too, absolutely. Just a small amount of incentive to cover some of the time. In our lake community, it's $1,000 to cover some of the time. Yeah, absolutely. Incentives to do fire smarting is a little bit of money. helps to make the homeowner feel like it's not all entirely on them. Thanks, Jessica. Matt Rocha, hope I'm pronouncing that right, says, "Hi Keith, did you have any observations regarding the application or use of any fire retardant coverings, paints, gels, etc., in addition to the sprinklers that I've highlighted or in replacement of?" Apologies, this was covered earlier. No, I didn't talk about those. Geez, the word came into my head and went out of it now. Those materials, intumescent, I think is the word. Intumescent paints and stuff. You can spray all, you can apply to a house, and it absorbs the heat and it expands, and it creates these bubbles that I guess act as insulation. I didn't see any evidence of that on houses. We an intumescent wrap around telephone poles that were farther out into the wildland area. So the bottom, I don't know, meter and a half of several phone poles had this wrap that had clearly been activated. It looks like a little mesh, and then when heat is applied to it, it thickens, it expands, and protects the wood telephone pole. So we saw that. I didn't see it on any houses. I'm sorry. An anonymous attendee asks, as several insurers have recently partnered with private wildfire fighting firm, Wildfire Defense Systems, do you know if they were able to access Jasper and see any evidence of their mitigation services saving properties? Yes, absolutely. We saw plenty of, we saw evidence of these private firefighting firms, tanks that had been deployed, sprinklers that had been deployed, that sort of thing. Christine Calahoo asks, in addition to the carrot and stick, the embedding of FireSmart into municipal level building requirements, I note wildfires are usually not the top priority for legislators in developing urban areas and neighborhoods. But when preventative measures are built into the legislation and land planning of community, the likelihood of having to rebuild homes after fire is greatly reduced. And she quotes FireSmart. That's a quote from FireSmart. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, Christine. The International Code Council, which is the nonprofit in the United States that develops the model building codes there, they like to say that building codes are the foundation of community resilience. And I agree with them 100%. What we're talking about here with FireSmart, mostly what I've been talking about is voluntary measures, and we have never seen voluntary adaptation measures with an uptake in excess of 5, 10, 20% or so. So we are never going to get to resilient communities by voluntary measures. The only way to create, in my opinion, the only way to create true community level resilience is by using the building code. But that's a long process. It takes a long time. This National WUI Fire Guide was only published a couple of years ago. It takes a long time to turn the recommendation language there into mandatory language. I showed you examples from the United States that were mandatory language, but our building codes are not exactly the same as US building codes. So we can't simply adopt the International Wildland-Urban Interface Code. We can't simply adopt the appropriate chapter of the California Building Code into Canadian codes. We do have to, if we're going to make mandatory fire resistance in the wildland-urban interface, we're going to have to adapt our own code language, most likely coming from the National WUI Fire Guide. Cheryl Evans asks, are there examples of large-scale sprinkler use in a community reducing water pressure at fire hydrants needed for firefighting? Fire pressure did drop off in Jasper late into the fire. But I think that the firefighters told me that was because of houses burning down and their lines fracturing, the pressure going away not because everybody had their sprinklers on, but because so many houses had burned down, and there was now water gushing out of the service line. G1 Hung asks, would FireSmart align with net zero objectives? Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think so. Well, let me back off a little bit. The National WUI Fire Guide has features that align with net zero objectives. In particular, the National WUI Fire Guide, one of the options is to have exterior insulation, that is to say, insulation immediately behind the non-combustible cladding, but outside of the studs from the stud wall. So preventing heat from coming from outside of the house into the house and igniting the combustible parts of walls. That's one of the options from the National WUI Fire Guide. And insulation is insulation. I mean, if it prevents heat flowing in, it also prevents heat flowing out. It's just on the outside of the wall rather than in the space between the studs or on the inside of the wall. So I think that's one way in which FireSmart aligns with net zero objectives. And I think there are probably other examples as well. Lyle Unwin asks, was there a similar post-wildfire assessment completed in Lytton, British Columbia? If so, were observations consistent or perhaps different from those in Paradise and Jasper? Lyle, if you search our webpage, ICLR.org, you will find examinations of Lytton and blocking on the name because of the Fort McMurray, performed by colleagues of ICLRs. I don't know if I remember that the Fort McMurray examination was pairwise. I can't remember whether the Lytton one was probably not, because there were very few surviving buildings, so it was difficult. It would have been difficult to do a similar assessment in Lytton, because there was no way to do pairwise assessment. But search there and you'll find some analogous, search ICLR.org and you will find analogous studies of Lytton and Fort Mac. And I think that we are coming out with a Kelowna report shortly. And by shortly, I mean months. Magda, hi Magda. Magda, whom you saw a couple of our presentation today. She says, hi Keith, did you observe any buildings that were constructed from ICFs? Sorry, Magda, I don't know what an ICF is. How were they impacted? Magda, if you will ask another question and explain what an ICF is. You may have told me last week, and I've forgotten what it means, but and for that matter, if you want to answer that question yourself, I'd be grateful. Sorry. It says, hi, this is not Magda. This is Lucas Coletta from NRCan. Magda shared her webinar link with me. Sorry, Lucas, would you kindly tell me what an ICF is, or remind me what an ICF is? David Camp. Very welcome, David. That is why we are here. Christine, insulated concrete form. Thank you. Sorry, I have people, I've heard that term before. I don't remember seeing any insulated concrete form construction. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I don't remember. Thanks. Thank you. Two of you have answered that. Thanks, Cheryl. Christine Calahoo asks, highly recommended that FireSmart Canada and local chapters with ICLR, with the Canadian Institute of Planners and others, work together to create adaptable local language specific to enhancing local resilience, enabling local governments to see the be by with, see, I don't know what, a little bit of word salad there, the something of approachable local bylaw language. Have the experts, ICLR, FireSmart, etc., partner with the professional planners and engineers to develop workable policy at the local level. Christine, I'm sure we are receptive to that kind of collaboration. Feel free to reach out to me or to my colleague Dan Sandig or to others. Thanks. Jessica Showbridge says, ha, we are presently at the lake that burned half to the ground last summer. And there is an insulated concrete form building being built right now, concrete pouring as we speak to replace a structure that burned. How about that? All right. Thanks, Jessica. That is all of our questions. We do not need to go to the full 90 minutes. I am grateful for, oh, here's Sandy with a last minute question. Sandy Johnson asks, Jasper had a reputation of being an example of wildfire preparedness. Absolutely. Their efforts included community fire breaks and residential fire smart. Definitely, there were several fire smart communities. Municipalities are struggling with costs. Was there evidence in Jasper that indicates where the mitigation dollars are best spent, fire breaks versus fire smart? Well, best spent, that's a toughie. That's sort of a quantitative question where I would have to be able to say there was strong evidence one way or the other. My intuition is that you can control what happens at your own house and in your own yard, and that relying on the neighbors or the community to protect your house is probably less safe than doing it yourself. So I don't know if that's evidence about the mitigation effectiveness. It's maybe more a guess or an opinion about which way I would go if I had a house in the wildland-urban interface, and it would be more towards making sure that my home and my yard were protected in the way that that Uber house and the way that a lot of other houses in the neighborhood were protected. Cheryl Evans, fire breaks are public funds generally. Fire Smart is public funds, two different pots of money and locus of control. Yeah, and yeah, so Fire Smart is, having the firefighters come out and do that assessment does rely on public resources, but the stuff that you have to do to your own house, that's going to tend to come out of your own pocket, absent these incentives like one or two others have suggested. So I guess the point is that it's not a question of one or the other, because there's two different sets of decision makers making those choices. So as a homeowner, maybe this sort of explains my own rationale to me. As a homeowner, I have control about what I do to my house. If I were a city council member, I would have control over what I did in community vegetation management, and maybe the sum is more than the sum of the parts. Christine Callahoo says, too bad that this is deemed an either or. Yeah, good point. Watson Lake and the Yukon in general see fire breaks as part of FireSmart. Thanks. Cheryl Evans, yeah, private funds for private side mitigation. Absolutely. Stuart says, really valuable presentation and discussion. Thanks, Keith and ICLR. Stuart, you are very welcome. Thank you for coming. Jessica, could we have a community rating system where communities that score higher on a scale get better rates on insurance? Well, we see that sort of thing in the United States, so clearly it is a possibility. How much work it would be and how successful it would be, I don't know. But it seems like it's certainly worth exploring. Okay, that is all the open questions. So I am going to let you all go. It's 17 minutes after the hour. You get 13 minutes back, 12 minutes back. Thank you so much for attending. Oh my gosh. Cheryl, I'm going to come back to your question and treat it as the last question. But before I do that, I'm going to thank everyone for attending and remind you of the Friday Forum for September 13th at the same time. That's a Friday, September 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, where I'm going to be presenting once again on the and I'm going to be speaking on the cost effectiveness of above code design of new buildings to resist strong winds. In particular, I'm going to be talking about a benefit cost analysis that ICLR performed of a new voluntary standard called CSA S520. So that's next month. Last question from Cheryl. Will these wonderful surviving home stories be shared as simple case studies and or slides that we can share? Absolutely. I'm going to create a PDF of my deck, and we will post it on ICLR's website by Monday or so, along with video of this webinar. You'll find it at www.iclr.org/workshops. And feel free to download the PDF and share it, or share the link to the recording. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks everybody else, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.